Rome 360, the 360 churches of Rome. I'm Tom Shaker. Welcome to the Eternal City. Here we go. And I'd like to officially introduce our two co-hosts today. On my right, your left, is Professor Dr. Elizabeth Lev. And on my left, your right, Wilhelm Hoyer, journalist at Vatican Radio.
I came to Rome when I was 17 with my parents. And I remember the first day that I came to Rome. I came in a taxi. And I saw colors, I saw buildings, the smells. There was something that I recognized. In a way, I'd come home. Because of all the cities I've lived in, Rome is the city that most resembles how it looks like inside me.
And I studied art history. I happened to study Baroque art history, and, well, what's more Baroque than Rome?
Now, are there really 360 churches in the Roman center?
Let's put it this way. If you're thinking in terms of buying a postcard of the city of Rome, what are you looking for? You're looking for domes. You're looking for what is the most characteristic vista of the city. So the way Paris has its spires, or Greek town has its little white houses against a deep blue sea, or Manhattan has its skyscrapers, Rome has domes. And the domes come from its churches, 360 of them, all spiraling outwards all over the city. So the idea is to take a look all around us in this wonderful city, this star-shaped city, at our churches, at our domes, and then take a 360 look at the churches themselves.
And I thought, you know what? It'd be fun today if we started with the granddaddy of them all, right in the middle of the city, the perfect circle, the Pantheon. The Pantheon, in the center of the circle in Rome, the most recognized circle on the planet, the most perfect circle ever built as far as I'm concerned. You know, they talk about the 7 ancient wonders of the world, and they talk about the 7 modern wonders of the world, but in both of those lists, they haven't mentioned this puppy here right behind me.
If Rome is a city of 360 degrees of churches, then the Pantheon is the epicenter that created everything around it. The Pantheon is probably the most influential building for the construction of the churches, particularly the domes we see scattered all over the city. And the Pantheon, top of it, for the city of Rome itself, it was our bid for the pyramids 2,000 years ago. It's the great monumental construction, first made for pagan gods, then turned into a building for the Christian God, and now something that we come and see and admire, this fusion of antiquity and Christianity in one single building.
Pantheon is a building that has seen everything and has survived everything. Everything that we think should have destroyed it actually survived, which makes it very, very unique in the world. As the real expression of the Roman spirit is very, very interesting, because if you asked a Roman 2,000 years ago, how long would empire last? They would have said forever.
When we talk about the Pantheon, actually, I think we should be talking about 3 different pantheons.
Like everything in the city itself, everything is a layer. Everything is one thing on top of the other, and so is the history of the Pantheon. We start out with the greatest builder Rome ever knew, the reign of Augustus and his right-hand man Agrippa.
Octavius, otherwise known as Caesar Augustus, the first emperor, the longest ruling emperor, and we call him the Hollywood Emperor because he found Rome a city of brick and made it a city of marble. One of his major constructions was to get his buddy, Agrippa, to build a temple in the Campus Martius, the Field of Mars.
And Agrippa built a building that was so astonishing, it was written up in ancient history by Pliny the Elder. It was a pantheon dedicated to all the gods. It was a building constructed around 25 BC, except it was described to us by Pliny as rectangular, facing in the opposite direction as the Pantheon today. So you can imagine how archaeologists and students of history felt when they were reading Pliny's description. They were looking at our present Pantheon. They saw the name Agrippa on it and thought, well, did Pliny need glasses? But the fact is, later on, the discovery of brick dating, various archaeological discoveries allowed us to learn that the Pantheon was built once in 25 BC, burnt down, then built again in 125 by the next great building emperor, who was Hadrian.
And right around 117 AD, Hadrian and his architect, Apollodorus of Damascus, start the construction of the Pantheon. Of course, there's lots of rumors that Apollodorus and Hadrian fought over the design, Apollodorus telling the emperor, "Oh, you and your stupid round domes." In fact, a lot of people believe that Apollodorus of Damascus had to commit suicide because Hadrian told him, either you take yourself out or I'm going to take you out myself. This is why you should probably never criticize the emperor.
Hadrian built a building that was going to sum up the greatness of the Roman people. He's the same emperor who built a temple to Rome, the goddess. At the same time, he builds this temple to men who become gods. That building has lasted all these years. It's survived sacks. It's seen everything that could possibly happen to the city. This city has had earthquakes. It's had natural disasters. It's had everybody invade, sometimes 3 times in 1 century, and yet the Pantheon still stands.
So a lot of people say architecturally the greatest invention ever was the wheel. I still think number 1A is the keystone, and I think it's one of the reasons is this baby here.
I don't know, in a town of how many millions of motorini and cars, I dare say the Romans would beg to differ. But you're right, without the arch we wouldn't have had the Pantheon. It was that technology which the Romans really harnessed, of having a keystone and the weight that would distribute onto these weight-bearing piers that allowed the Romans to build these incredible buildings to great heights and support unbelievable amounts of weight, like a concrete dome.
Yeah, you know, when you think about it, you know, you're right. I mean, what do you want? You want a chariot? Or do you want fresh water in your house? I think I would take the water first. And of course, don't forget, all of these arches were hidden, right?
Well, yes, the arch wouldn't have been visible because of the fact that the Romans, even though this technology is what made them the greatest society for engineering, the technology would be covered up by sheaths of marble. So all we saw was the Pantheon with its white skin of travertine, these bronze plates on the top. It would look like a pearl on a golden clasp sitting in the middle of the Campus Martius.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, all that beautiful marble, that beautiful pearl, of course, later on, well, they want the marble because they're either building a church or they're turning it into, you know, dust for the concrete or who knows what, or maybe even a little fresco dust for Raphael. But needless to say, all that wonderful marble wallpaper, all about this thick, right? About like that.
That's so thick.
Just take that crowbar, yank that off, and this is what we have left. But it's still fantastical. The interesting thing about the Pantheon, you know, is this perfect circle. What about this poured concrete dome?
That was a Roman invention, the concrete dome. It actually is, still today, the largest concrete dome in the world. And concrete actually was even a Roman invention.
Poured concrete, amazing span, and it's been here working for 2,000 years. And in just a little while, we're going to go inside.
That's exactly where the Romans believed that men had become gods. They've conquered, they've seen the world. They've gone to Greece, they've seen the keystone, they learned how to make an arch. They've headed down towards Naples, they've discovered the volcanic sand, they figured out that the volcanic sand can be slaked into concrete, and then they take these elements, these resources that they've learned from casting their eyes around the Mediterranean, and they put it together with their own extraordinary resourcefulness and engineering skills. So, for example, principle number 1, you plan on putting a giant concrete dome on some walls. We strongly suggest you make your walls nice and thick. And so one of the great features of the Pantheon are these 19-foot thick walls. The idea of how men could achieve, how men could capture eternity, how man could capture immortality through his architecture, through his engineering, through all the things he knew how to do, that's what the Pantheon encompasses. And then that same capacity, that same achievement, the Christians found, appreciated, and translated, making the Pantheon the very first temple that they decided to save and turn into a Christian building.
In the 7th century AD, the Emperor Phocas says, "It's okay by me if you guys want to turn this into a church." Of course, Phocas isn't going to leave Constantinople. So the Pope in Rome at the time christens the Pantheon and turns it into Santa Maria of the Martyrs. It is then, and is still today, a functioning Catholic church. You focus on one thing, and so when they consecrate the Pantheon, make it Santa Maria of the Martyrs, they put a column, the last thing built in the ancient form, one column to the Emperor Phocas, to honor Phocas. And so when you focus on one thing. How about that one?
Well, it's not true.
It's not, that's what I'm saying.
Fiction.
Yes. That's the point.
That said, he did focus on one thing. And that was the only good thing that he did. Phocas was not a very nice man. And the only good thing that he did in his life was to donate the Pantheon to the church.
The Pantheon's new name as a Christian church is St. Mary of the Martyrs. So the 28 cartloads of the bodies of martyrs were brought from the catacombs in the 8th century, the 7th, 8th century, in a period when the catacombs would have to close, and they were placed into the Pantheon. So first and foremost, the Pantheon is the burial place of these many, many martyrs. And it's an amazing irony of this building, because if you consider that the Pantheon was built for a people who believed that men became gods, and the martyrs were the people who died because they didn't believe it. And now the Pantheon is holding on to their bodies, conserving them for the rest of eternity. Well, impressive. And then the Pantheon then became, in the Renaissance era, I think many of us go there, many art historians go there in a form of pilgrimage, because in the Renaissance, the Christian world fully encompassed, harnessed, and learned to build on the achievements of the ancients. Artists began to look at the Pantheon as the greatest inspiration they had. And the first artist we know to be buried in the Pantheon was Raphael, whose death at age 37 shocked the world. This young man with so much promise, who had done so much in such a short time, and people were waiting to see what else he was going to accomplish. Handsome, accomplished, and he also managed to fill the gossip pages pretty well. And so he dies suddenly of a fever. On his deathbed, he asks for one thing: to be buried in the Pantheon. And that wish was accorded to him, and he was placed in the Pantheon. We can still see his tomb today. And then the other great artists followed suit. So we have Baldassare Peruzzi, the architect of Villa Farnesina, for example. We have Annibale Carracci, who was probably one of the best artists of the 17th century, and so on and so forth. We see this building of a great artistic community, not only in the tombs of the Pantheon, but even in the Accademia of the Virtuosi, which is a group of artists which have been there since the time of Raphael, who meet in the Pantheon, draw their inspiration from these great ancient stones, and to this day continue to produce works of art. The most famous tombs, the most obvious tombs, are the tombs of the two kings of Italy. The Savoy kings of Italy are remembered in two tombs facing each other on either side of the Pantheon. The first king of Italy, Victor Emmanuel II, is remembered in a large bronze plaque on the right-hand side with a rather notorious phrase underneath it. We know the Padre della Patria, which is the title that Augustus took unto himself, the father of the fatherland. On the opposite side, you have the tomb of Umberto I, the second king of Italy, assassinated in 1900, but underneath it, a discreet little tomb is dedicated to his wife, Margherita. And Margherita is best known to us, and perhaps the person who most deserves the honor guard that you see there standing there day and night, because of the fact that it was her state trip to Naples that brought about Pizza Margherita. Pantheon affects Santa Maria sopra Minerva in the sense of wisdom on top of wisdom. In Church of Sant'Ivo alla Sapienza, actually the Church of St. Ives dedicated to wisdom, which is the old name of the Roman University, Borromini really takes on the Pantheon, trying to describe different types of wisdom in that unbelievably clever dome. There you have really one of the most direct influences of the Pantheon. And so the reason for these churches and the reason for starting with the Pantheon, they learned it all from the Pantheon.
Exactly.
The Pantheon produces a building where you walk up to a facade which is rectangular. You walked into a portico that was rectangular. You expected to find a church that would be rectangular. You know the world. You know, you've seen plenty of temples. You walk through that door and you walk into this giant domed space. It's meant to make you amazed. And when you are amazed and you're taken out of that comfort zone, that way that you're used to living, that's the moment with wonder. That's where true curiosity, true interest, true intellectual inquiry starts with wonder. And so these churches that are meant to make you catch your breath, they are churches that are meant to make you wonder. Is there something bigger than me out there?
And it's interesting, when we say the largest dome in the world, it's 1 meter wider in diameter than the Dome of St. Peter's. And you like to think that Michelangelo, when he designed St. Peter's Dome, of course he wasn't alive when it got built, that he intentionally made that dome 1 meter shorter in diameter to pay homage to the diameter of the Pantheon. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, right?
Well, we probably think that is true, because Michelangelo did want to tip his hat to the Pantheon.
So, Hadrian's Pantheon, 117 AD, arguably the most magnificent building in the world. How do you pour concrete into a perfect circle? As far as I'm concerned, this is how it happened. The Martians came down, went to a beautiful big super hardware store, bought a bunch of stuff, built the temple, and went back to Mars. Because all the other explanations are really hard to believe. How could people 2,000 years ago build a perfect dome of poured concrete with an oculus that's also a perfect circle, and a building designed to line up to the equinox and the seasons? So at the summer and winter equinox, the sun hits the doorway of the Pantheon.
That's the only light source inside the building. Of course, it represents the sun. The whole building represents the universe. That's what we have to remember about the Pantheon. It's Roman ideology. Roman ideology is unity.
The Pantheon is similar to Stonehenge, which is 2,000 years older than that. Well, Julius Caesar was in England for a while. Maybe he did see Stonehenge. And the thing is, when you go to the Pantheon on a beautiful sunny day like this, you'll see the sun hitting the dome, and what day, what month, what season is as the sun tracks. And at the equinox, at noontime, very close, boom, at that front door, the sun hits. One of the best shots of the Pantheon is the day when that sun comes through the oculus and right out the front door.
Which happens to be right around April 21st, which is the birthday of Rome.
Exactly.
Ah, and they built it knowing that.
I strongly suspect so. The Romans rarely left anything to chance. Would mind the fact that the people think aliens made it, because there's a famous story about one of the sacks of Rome, when these barbarians were coming through the city and torching and destroying and tearing down, and that they came to a stop in front of the Pantheon and they asked themselves, what manner of men made this? What manner of men? Men who are beyond the normal, beyond the ordinary, men who can make the extraordinary. The Pantheon helps us all to feel part of the extraordinary. Think of all the extraordinary men who have learned from it. You have Michelangelo, Brunelleschi, you have Bernini, all these extraordinary men who have learned from this building.
The ass ears of Bernini. Bernini, of course, built 2 bell towers on the top of the Pantheon, each side of the pediment, and of course they are now gone. People say he built them, then he got embarrassed, and then he took them down. So there's a little bit of fact to this, but there's a lot of fantasy.
Well, there's pictures of it. There's photographs of them. And so they lasted until the 1800s. And it's true, he did build them. And we're very lucky not to see them today.
However, there's an interesting reason why they might have put up those towers, and which actually went up in the very, very last years of the 17th century, and actually I think they were put up in the 18th century by somebody else. But in many ways, I suspect they were responding to the arrival of tourists. I mean, one of the things that we're dealing with in Rome is a city that has an influx of pilgrims from the arrival of the legalization of Christianity in 313 brings pilgrims to the city. And so these are people who want to see the tombs of St. Peter, they want to see the tombs of St. Paul, they want to remember the martyrs, and all of these places to them are special for that very soil where these great saints lived and walked and died. And as we come into the 1700s, we begin to get a new type of visitor, which are these grand tourists. And these grand tourists kind of come through the city almost with blinders on. So Peter, whatever, Paul, whatever, show me the ancient monuments. And I somehow suspect, given the timing of the construction of those two ass's ears, is a way to kind of really proclaim, despite its aesthetic offense, which of course it was, but to proclaim this building no longer a pagan temple. So all of those who would choose to use the Pantheon, as you see its translation in France into the Panthéon, which becomes a completely, if you will, secular temple, in order to remind people that this is no longer a secular space. And the reason why they can admire it is because it became a Christian space, is to put up something that really declares it as a church. So I think perhaps even though we in the 19th century, with our sense of purism regarding the ancient monuments and the Christian monuments, we prefer to see things in a different way. I think if you try to understand the papacy facing an onslaught of people who are completely uninterested in the church and want to take the secular aspect of Rome, ignoring the faith aspect, it seems like a response.
As opposed to, Olympus where the gods live, they're building a tower to connect to the gods. You have the real connection to the spirit of God. And the Pantheon, again, our host behind us here, is the perfect example of that. The ass ears of Bernini, those two bell towers done by Bernini. Piranesi shows us these bell towers in the 18th century, and it's not until the 19th century when these are down. And here is a magnificent cross-section of the perfect circle and the perfect circle of the Pantheon. You can see the magnificence of the structure and how thick the walls were to support that magnificent concrete dome. A marvelous bit of engineering, and as far as I'm concerned, the wonder of the world, the Pantheon. One of the most magnificent things about the Pantheon, that it's always been open for business. For 2,000 years, the doors have been open and people have been going in and enjoying this magnificent temple. Whether to worship, whether to marvel, or whether to just get out of the rain or to get out of the heat. Magnificent view, beautiful light here in the Pantheon this morning. You see the sun shining, the golden light, and as we pan left, we see they're working in Rome today. Here's the truck guy taking care of business. There's a tourist taking a photo. And as you keep panning past the tourist group going by, we see the storefront of Signor Casale. What a great location. In 1878, his family started this print shop, and they're still here selling prints of Rome, ancient Rome, and of course, their favorite subject, the Pantheon.
At the moment, yes, we sell print and also the copy of the old print. At this point, you have the original, Piranesi, Rossini. This one is the Pantheon,
now
this one is my shop.
There's his shop.
Front have a nice elephant, and the church is a nice piazza in Piazza Minerva.
if we can get this without any glare, I hope, because the Pope's wearing his yarmulke along with this man. So this is, the owner's Jewish. Are you Jewish too?
No, I'm Muslim.
Yeah. So we have the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, with the Jewish man who owns the store and the Muslim guy who's running it.
Quite amazing to sit in front of the Pantheon and in a way be able to have a conversation with a building that more than any other building in the world kind of summarizes our civilization.
Now a beautiful coffee bar, and believe me, come upstairs, the coffee here is great. Nice. Right in the center city, and my buddy, did you get him? I love this guy, you know.
And we wonder, how did such an empire, the empire that was too big to fail, how did that fall apart, and how did this new civilization come, rise, and thrive on these ashes? And we find that in the Pantheon, it tells us this amazing story about the Romans who had dreams of greatness.
Hasta la vista,
Baby.